We'll start by looking at the verse and really clearly, cleanly, and then we'll go from there. Kim pramatasya bahubi parokshai hayanai iha. Kim pramatasya bahubi hayanai. Kim is the standard Sanskrit interrogative. It means what? So, Kim pramatasya. What of the fools? What of the fools? Bahubi hayanai. With many years of life. With their many years of life. Iha in this world. What are the fools with their many years of life in this world? Parokshai. Parokshai means beyond your vision. Paras in Sanskrit means beyond, and aksha means eye. And so something which is beyond your eye is paroksha. It's outside of your vision. You can't see it. It's unknown to you. So what's the value of a life of many, many years in this world, inexperienced, with the truth being beyond your vision? What's the value of such a life? There's two parts of the verse. This is the first part. I want to make sure we followed it. Kim pramatasya bahubi parokshai hayanai iha. What's the value? Is that Kishori? Who's sitting behind the Gruta Stamba? Oh no, it's you? Okay. Ah, it's fine. What's the value of a long life of many years in this world if the truth remains outside of your grasp, outside of your vision? This is kind of this book has about 14,000 verses. And this particular verse is basically at the very, very beginning of the book. When the main speaker of the book gets on the microphone, so to speak, and begins giving his discourse, this is the first verse he speaks. Basically. So the Bhagavad Purana, with its 335 chapters and 14,000 plus verses, this is kind of verse number 1. This is how he starts off. It's part of his opening comments. What's the value of a long life ignorant of the truth? With the truth beyond your sight, outside of your sight. Varam muhurtam viditam katase shreyase yataha. Varam muhurtam. Better one muhurta. Better just one muhurta. Viditam, one muhurta of proper understanding. Varam muhurtam viditam gatate shreyase yataha. By which you can strive for shreyas. Better one muhurta of knowing, of knowledge, of understanding. By which, yata means by which, gatate, you'll strive, he'll strive, she'll strive, shreyase, for the ultimate benefit. Shreyas. So, better one muhurta. This is a... What is the value of a long life of many years where the truth is paroksha? Better one muhurta of knowledge, of knowing, of understanding, by which you will strive for shreyas. So to understand the verse, you need to know 3 words. What's the value of a long life of an ignorant person where the truth is paroksha. Better one muhurta of understanding by which you can strive after shreyas. So to understand if you speak English, then to understand the verse, you now need to know 3 words. What are the 3 words you need to know? Give me one of them. Paroksha. It's one of them, right? Number 2? Muhurta, right? Number 3? Shreyas. Good. All right. So paroksha we already did. Paroksha literally means paras aksha, something which is beyond your sight. That's paroksha. So what's the value of a long life of many years where the truth remains just beyond your sight? Better one muhurta of having understood, of proper understanding, by which you can strive after shreyas. Muhurta, just like most of the world uses a metric system. Most of the world uses a metric system. And the metric system is pretty elegant. It's, you got millimeters and then, 1,000 millimeters, that's why milli, and then centimeters, that's 100 centimeters. And then that equals, a meter, and 1,000 meters equals a kilometer. So there's a certain elegance to the metric system. The metric system replaced the imperial system, which replaced the Winchester system of measurement, which was adopted by, I think it was King Henry VIII. And that's the system of inches and hands. You have your inch and you have a hand, and then there's feet, and then yards, that system, miles. It's a lot more arbitrary. 12, I think it's 4 inches in a hand, 3 hands in a foot, 3 feet in a yard. Kind of 1,600 or so yards in a mile. It's a lot more arbitrary. It got replaced by the metric system. The Indian system for measuring time broke the day not into 24 hours, but it broke the day into 30 muhurtas. And a muhurta was 48 minutes. And so there's 24 hours in a day, so it's 24 times 60, you get 1,440 minutes. Muhurtas are 48 minutes each, there's 30 of them, 30 times 48, and you come up with the same 1,440. It's another way of breaking down the day. And so the elegance of the muhurta system is that the same way that 30 days make up a month, because the lunar cycle, the moon gets smaller for 15 days and then disappears. It's a dark moon night. And then it gets bigger for 15 days, and that's the full moon. And so one complete lunar cycle is a month, and it's made up of 30 days, 29 point something days. And similarly, you've got the 30 muhurtas, which make up a day, and so there's an elegance in measuring your day the same way you measure your month, and it creates a certain elegance in the system. Just like the metric system with centimeters and millimeters, which then, that leads to meters and then kilometers, and there's kind of an elegance across the board. So the Indian system of measuring time has that effect. So a muhurta literally means 48 minutes. Better one muhurta of understanding. So let's go back and start again. Kim pramatasya bahubi parokshai hayanai iha varam muhurtam viditam. What is the value of a long life of many years of ignorance where the truth is just outside of your sight? better one muhurta, one 48-minute, an hour of knowing. Gata se shreyase yataha. Gatate shreyase yataha. By which you'll strive for shreyas. So let's go over the verse again. Kim, what is pramatasya bahubi hayanai? What is the value of many, many years? Pramatasya, of the ignorance, of the fools. Parokshai, where the truth is just beyond your sight. Varam muhurtam viditam, better one muhurta of knowledge. A muhurta being 1 hour of knowledge. Gatate shreyase yataha, by which you will strive after shreyas. So now there's just one word left that we have to know in order to know what the verse is saying. What's that word? Shreyas. Yeah. You were born in India, right? You know what the word Shreyas means?
Shreyas is long-term benefit. Opposite of that is praise. Praise is short-term benefit. Shreyas is like also.
Did you learn this from us?
No, from here.
You learned it from us. You didn't learn it on your own. Growing up, you didn't learn it. You wouldn't have learned it growing up either, right? Shreyas, prayas.
Shreyas probably being successful because it sounds similar to other terms in my native language.
Like Shri, right? Prosperity, right? Good.
Common in India. Many people deal Shreyas.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah, but no one knows the meaning in it.
I'm also familiar with that. That's why I asked you. There's a text called the Katha Upanishad. It's the oldest Upanishad. These are very, very old Vedic texts. There's kind of two basic stratum of Vedic texts. There's the Shruti, the oldest stratum of Vedic literatures. That comprises the Samhitas, the Aranyakas, Brahmanas, and the Upanishads. And so the Upanishads are really, in terms of like philosophical usage, the Upanishads are pretty much as far back as everybody goes. We chant mantras from the Samhitas when we do puja. Hari Om Tat Vishnoho Padamam Padagung Sada Pasyanti Sudayaha Diviva Chakshuratatam Tat Viprasabhanyavo Jagavangsa Samindate Vishnayat Padamam Padam. So sometimes you'll chant Rig Vedic mantras when you do puja and stuff like that, but they're not really studied philosophically. They're more incantations. When you're looking at studying something philosophically, the Upanishads represent the oldest stratum of Vedic literature that's studied in a philosophical, theological sense. And of those Upanishads, the Katha Upanishad is the oldest. And we find the term Shreyas and Prayas are introduced in the Katha Upanishad. A famous verse. Shreyas cha prayas cha manusham etat manusham etad asau. Dia vrinite, that samparitya, dhira samparitya, that in a person's life you'll get shreyas and prayas, and a wise person, he examines the two of them and distinguishes between the two of them, and he chooses the shreyas and not the prayas. A very, very old text. Now it's somewhat enigmatic because it doesn't define the terms. Usually when you introduce terms, you define them and how you're using them in that instance, which is essentially what I've done today. But the Katha Upanishad does not then define the terms. It introduces them. But if you look at the roots of the terms, the meaning becomes clear. Shreyas comes from the Sanskrit root, verbal root, Shri, which means brilliance, beauty, success, benefit, and is oftentimes used in a very, very spiritual sense. Prayas comes from the Sanskrit dhatu, pri, and pri specifically means pleasure and enjoyment. So they say that wise people will choose shreyas instead of prayas, because shreyas is ultimate good as opposed to apparent good, or that which is beneficial versus that which is merely pleasing. The big illusion is that pleasure equates to happiness. Pleasure it really doesn't take a whole lot of experience in the world to figure this one out if you're just objective, if you're not guilty of confirmation bias. It doesn't take a huge amount of experience in this world to realize that pleasure does not equate to happiness. People get pleasure from food, they get pleasure from sex, they get pleasure from all sorts of stuff. But the fundamental feature of pleasure is that by its very nature, pleasure is temporary and has a beginning and an end, and it forms an addictive pattern where you have to now get pleasure again and again. There's a law of diminishing returns where you get less enjoyment out of it the second and third and fourth time. Pretty soon you have to engage in activity merely to stop yourself from suffering, and that's an addiction. When the activity is no longer engaging because it gives pleasure per se, but it's engaging because it stops pain, and you've put yourself in a situation where you're without some kind of an external stimuli, you're going to undergo pain. It's a rough spot to be in. Now, to a certain extent, water, food, sleep, these are things that we require for the maintenance of our body, and we require them in air at regular intervals. With air and water, it's really frequently. With food, it's pretty frequently, but not quite as important as air and water. And so there's an addictive aspect to existence fundamentally. That's why people create civilizations on the banks of rivers and such, so that they're close to a water source. Why they settle in places where they can grow food or where they can gather food, because they need to be close to a food source. In this sense, our life is very much like an animal's life. And there's an instinct for survival. Just merely existing in this world means that you're bound. And you become anchored. And you have a certain addictive, habitual relationship with necessities of life. And if you don't get those necessities at regular intervals, daily, you'll start to suffer dramatically. The weird thing is that we then add extra stuff to the equation. People add extra things to the equation. They'll add drugs and alcohol. They'll add fame and notoriety. They'll add sex to this equation, so that in addition to needing food and water to live, we also end up needing a bunch of other stuff in order to just function. Even we're social mammals, so we require some degree of social contact to stop from going crazy. But our neurotransmitters in our brain get linked up to our attachment figures, and now your oxytocin and serotonin levels and your dopamine levels get affected directly by the people that you're around, and that becomes a whole other thing. And so there's a number of ways in which, in addition to the basic things we have to do to survive, we add a bunch of other stuff to that equation. And now your happiness is linked to your pleasure, which means it's super shallow because a few days is all it takes for you to start to suffer, maximum. And then a lot of times we give that control away to other people and other things external to ourselves, and you end up in this incredibly addictive lifestyle where you've got all these external features which don't have to be part of your bare bones minimums necessities, but you made them part of it, and now you got to be, next to a gas station for the rest of your life so you can get your fix. Next to a 7-Eleven, which is, where the things people absolutely cannot live without. Even at 2 o'clock in the morning, you got to be able to go somewhere to get those things, and now your life is lived in this kind of a way where you can't just be happy. You don't possess your own happiness. It belongs to external stimuli, be it other people or other things, and now you're miserable if you don't get those things, and you're always on the back foot because those things can be taken from you because you don't have power over them, and you just gave up your happiness for pleasure by mistaking the two. You practically speaking, just have to be a teenager to have understood this. You might even be able to understand it pre-adolescence. You have to be a little thoughtful. Sometimes I'll walk you through it. I'm pretty sure you could even explain this to someone pre-adolescent. By the time you hit puberty, these things become just very obvious. And it takes a lot of work to dumb ourselves down to not notice this. To maintain the charade that pleasurable things equal happiness. And amazingly, it's like a testament to the human power of intellect that people are able to dumb themselves down for an entire lifetime. Now you're old. Your testosterone and estrogen levels have just depleted. You're practically speaking, for all intents and purposes, androgynous. That's what happens to people when they get old. And people are just struggling to keep up appearances, to keep up with their addictions. And it gets embarrassing. You see old people trying to act like young people. It gets just downright embarrassing. There's no grace. See old people dressed up in the latest fashions, trying to look like they're young, and it's like, who are you fooling? Yourself. It's an incredible testament to the power of our minds that we're able to dumb ourselves down for an entire lifetime to this obvious truth of reality, which is that pleasure does not equal happiness. I mean, in this sense, we have something, this is kind of Eastern spirituality generally conceived, but we have a lot in common with Buddhism in the sense, the primary of the Four Noble Truths, the first truth, idam dukkha. This world is suffering. Idam dukkha samudaya. This suffering in this world has a cause. Idam dukkham nirodha. And the cause of suffering in this world can also have an end. And what is that cause? In Pali it's tanha, which in Sanskrit is trishna. Trishna. Trishna means thirst. What caused you to suffer? Your thirst for enjoyment in this world caused you to suffer because you become attached to the result. You don't possess your own happiness. It's external to yourself. If you don't get the result you want, you don't get the thing you want, you're going to be unhappy. You've given away your power. You've given away your sunshine. And now you're happy when you look out and the sun in the sky. You're miserable when it's rainy, but you could have carried your sunshine in your pocket. You could have done that. You could have figured out a way to find happiness independent of your external circumstances. But you chose not to do that. And now your attachment, your thirst for this world, kam in Sanskrit, your lust for this world, your desire for this world, is the birthplace of your suffering. The world has loss and temporariness encoded into it. But by then attaching yourself to temporary things in this world instead of deeper things, you then link yourself fundamentally to this habitual, addictive, I have it, now I don't, I have it, now I don't, it satisfies, now it doesn't. And you live your life unnecessarily suffering because of your unnecessary attachment to the fundamentally temporary things of this world when you yourself are eternal. And you just dumbed yourself down. You gave up your freedom. You gave up your power. This truth is so fundamental and easy to point out that it's work not to notice it. It takes work. It takes incredible mental fortitude to ignore this truth of reality. On one side, if you acknowledge this reality, then you become nihilistic, you want to kill yourself, and the whole world becomes, torturous, and you just want to get out. On the other side, acknowledging this frees you up to start to really look at what else is out there. What other things can you attach yourself to? And it turns out you can't just, it's not the only thing on offer is pleasurable things in this world, which is where the word pre comes from, where the word preyas comes from. In fact, you can attach yourself to more, just like if you look at like this building, for instance. The building is a permanent structure, but not really. 100 years from now, this building will be gone. Now, the building's over 100 years old, but 100 years from now, this building will not be here. It'll have been replaced by a new building because this building's not going to last 200 years. I guess theoretically we could keep just fixing it and perpetuate. But at some point you got to replace the beams, At some point you got to replace like the actual structure of the building. But the principles behind this building, really the principles of Newtonian physics, classical mechanics, that determine gravity and structure and load and things like that, those principles are true anywhere in the world. And so the principles that made this building are much more true than the building itself because they last much longer and you can anchor yourself to them assuredly anywhere in the world. Did you follow this? They were true 1,000 years ago, they'll be true 1,000 years from now. Whereas the truth of this building in a few hundred years will be replaced by another building. And so when we're looking at what is true, what is real, a lot of times we look at things which have a longer term benefit, a longer term return on our investment. And that can either be in terms of quantity, like you make more money, but it can also be in terms of time span. You make money over a longer period of time, it becomes a more long-term investment which yields dividends for a longer period of time, which yields benefit for a longer period of time. We also place value on those things. That's why people go to college instead of just getting a job. They go to college and they delay their ability to go and earn so that they can go and they can make a better earn. That's why people invest in a business with its longer term prospects of success. That's why people invest in a relationship that lasts more than a day, because they're looking for a longer term return on their investment. We have this ability to broaden the scope of our conception of what is happiness and make it longer term or broader terms. Even the principles of classical mechanics have their limits. They don't work out in space at the speed of light the same way they work here. Or on a small scale, in the quantum world, they don't work. Atoms, subatomic particles, they don't follow the same rules that this building follows. They do weird things, like a quantum leap and other stuff like that, where fundamental particles of reality disappear and reappear somewhere else with no gap in time. And so even the principles that made this building have their limits out in space at a certain speed on a very, very small scale. Those principles don't hold up. Which is why people are looking for a grand universal theory, a way to join the quantum and the classical world together and have one theory of physics that accounts for everything, both big and small in this world. So as we start to look at what are my long-term prospects for happiness? What could make me happy besides pleasure? What could make me happy? Besides food and sex and sleep and water, what things could I look to for my happiness? Is there anything else available to me, or is this just all I got? We find that there are things. There's things like virtue, for example. And that would be available to anybody, irrespective of whether they believed in divinity or not. There's things like virtue. You can anchor yourself to a moral code, a way of living, things that you hold dear, loyalty, respect, helping others, depth. Those are things you can anchor yourself to that nobody can take away from you. Those are things you can take, and you just took your power back. And now whatever circumstance you're in, you can bring decency, consideration, empathy, love, service, depth, thoughtfulness, loyalty, honor. You can become integrated. You can have integrity, which means your value system, you live it. And now everywhere you go, you bring those things with you, and those things are there anywhere you go because they're yours, and you carry them with you wherever you go. And whatever circumstance you find yourself in, those things are there because they're with you. And nobody can take those things away from you. And if your happiness is anchored to those things, that's a way more permanent source of happiness. That's a way more profound way of being happy in this world. I'm not happy when pleasing things come to me. I'm happy when I behave according to my virtue. Now you got sunshine in your pocket. You can springboard from there. You can start to think about, are there even more fundamental principles of reality than my own personal virtues? Are there universal virtues? Is there a Sanatan Dharma? Is there a fundamental Dharma of the universe? Is there a fundamental spiritual Dharma of everything? I can attach myself to that. It's not just I create my own sense of virtue, but I attach myself to a greater purpose that exists across the world through all space and time. That takes it to another level. At the lowest level, you have prayas. Pleasure equates to happiness. You just bought into a lie. You're going to be miserable. Guaranteed. Above that, you have this level of virtue, personal virtue. That's way more solid. Way more solid. Way more powerful. And then above that, you have, if you're looking for a universal virtue, a universal truth, which is true for all people at all times. And really, that's the realm of spirituality. And when you look at a spiritual tradition, what are they doing? They're making a claim, hey, these are spiritual virtues. These are a set of spiritual virtues. You should adhere to these virtues. And they try to convince you. And if you become convinced, then you join that tradition. But there's a universal, fundamental virtue of all spirituality, which is that the material world is not all there is. Material pleasure is not all there is. There's something beyond. That's why spirituality and materialism are antonyms. Because every spiritual tradition has to believe in something spiritual beyond the physical. Otherwise, they'd be a materialist tradition or a physicalist tradition. But by the very nature of the word spiritualist, we're acknowledging that all spiritual people have something in common, namely they believe there's something beyond this physical world that you are a part of, that you can attach yourself to, which gives you a deeper, more profound experience. Now you can discuss what that is. You can try to figure out what that is, but that's another conversation. At least this is something, just by the word spiritual, that everybody has in common. And so now we go back to the verse. Kim pramatasya. What of the fools? Bahubi Hayanai, with their long lives, Parokshai, where the truth is just beyond their sight. Varam Muhurta, better just an hour, Viditam, of understanding. Yataha, by which Gatate Shreyase, by which you can begin striving for Shreyas instead of Prayas, for depth instead of shallowness, for happiness instead of pleasure, for virtue instead of sensuality, for ultimate virtue instead of individual virtue, instead of your own creative virtue. You can find what's the ultimate virtue of the universe. This is the opening line of a 14,000 verse book, and I think in many ways it encapsulates the essence of spirituality, the realization that all spiritual people have. Hey, there's got to be more than this. There's got to be something other than this. I just do this for 100 years. I just do this for 80 years. Like acquire wealth and have sex and make a family, and this is it? That's all there is? On the lowest level, you have people who have one-night stands and they take drugs and alcohol and things like that. Then you have your pious materialists, where they have a family and they have some sense of virtue. But still, their entire life is about materialism. They're like, sophisticated chimpanzees. They're raising their children, they're building skyscrapers, but it's all just about, getting more fruit that they can eat and getting more, it's still purely material. And then you go beyond that, and now you start to think, what's the purpose of life? Beyond just procreating, beyond just raising children, beyond just making money, what's the purpose of life? And the thing is, the nature of this world is that everything's temporary, and everything gets taken away from you. So if you don't learn this lesson, everything still gets taken away in due course. You're just miserable when it gets taken away because you got nothing else. You didn't use that little time you had to figure your way out. And so when the walls close in on you, you got no options. You just get crushed. You can imagine a game where you're put into a room and the walls are closing in on you really slowly from the very beginning. Almost imperceptibly. Almost imperceptibly. But if you look carefully enough, you can see that the walls are closing in on you. And you can see other rooms. And you can see people being crushed to death in those rooms. And you can hear their cries of agony. And if you measure carefully, you can see incrementally. And you can even time it out how long it's going to take before you're crushed like everybody else. And you watch your parents get crushed and your grandparents before them. And you see your elder friends getting crushed. And it's happening to you, and your room is getting smaller. What's the proper response to that situation? Eat food, have children, give them their own room so they're also getting crushed? And just forget about it? Watch TV? Take up a hobby? Granted, if you want to get out of the room, you're going to have to eat, you're going to have to drink. But what you spend your whole life trying to get out of that room. Your whole life should be spent, how am I going to get out of this room? At some point, it's going to get too small for me. What's my escape hatch? Any sane person is going to do that. Any sane person is going to think about these things and have them affect their life and have this be their project in life that they're searching after. Kim pramatasya bahubi. What of the hayanai, parokshai hayanai iha? What of the foolish people in this world that just the truth is always just outside of their grasp? They never found the escape hatch. They never found anything else. They never found anything deeper. They never found anything more profound. What's the value of their life? Varam muhurtam viditam gatase shreyase yataha. Better just 1 hour of seeing it clearly, of realizing what's going on here, of realizing there might be another option, and you're going to strive for finding, even just to be able to strive for looking for that, even that has great value. Just be able to strive to look for that has great value. A friend of mine, Chris Birch, whose family and friends are just in the back there. Chris and I knew each other for years. He came here for years. I found out recently his mother came here before him. But Chris came here for years, and we were friendly. And I didn't see him, I think probably for years. Maybe it was months, but it feels more like it was years. I didn't see him for a couple of years or a year, something like that. And he showed up a couple of weeks ago. I was really happy to see him. And then I got a call just, a week later, whatever it was, 5-6 days ago. Chris, who was, I think he was 30. How old was Chris? 34. He was 34. He passed away. Suddenly. 34 is pretty young. He's in good health. I don't know the specifics, it's rude to ask, but he passed away suddenly. And so my heart went out to everybody, and I said, well, please come tonight, we'll say some prayers for Chris, which we'll do at the end of the program. But I was just thinking, this is this world. Everything gets taken away. The best you can hope for is that things get taken away in their usual order, where parents die before the children, and children suffer, so the parents, they die first, and the children carry that weight, and then the children die, and their children carry that weight. The best you can hope for in this world is that things just happen in order. You become decrepit in old age as your strength and virility and even your intelligence is robbed from you inch by inch, moment by moment. And you just, you kind of fade out. That's the best most people hope for. I live a long life so I can get old and gray and decrepit and weak. Maybe get put on a ventilator for 5 minutes. It's like maybe I die in my sleep. People like that's some kind of virtue to die in your sleep. Some kind of blessing. That your children get to mourn you. People remember your name, and you stick your name on a building or something like that. But the fundamental structure of the world remains the same. Everyone dies. Everything gets taken away. Nothing lasts. Everything's temporary. The more you connect yourself to that, the more guaranteed you are that you're going to suffer over and over and over again. Like a foolish animal that just keeps getting caught in a trap and just has no idea why. Never learns. Like the dumbest of animals. Even animals figure this stuff out. And that's why I said it takes an incredible amount of mental fortitude to willfully, almost willfully dumb yourself down to live an animalistic life of searching after preyas. But there's this other possibility. You can think, wait a second, there's something other than pleasure. There's some deeper, fundamental source of happiness. What is that? How do I find that? Let me make use of this life to search after that. Anyway, my little brother died in 2015, also tragically, a little bit older than your son. He was 37. He died of a drug overdose, tragically, unfortunately. I'm so not into drugs. I've been sober since I was 17, since 1989. I'm 50 now. I haven't even drunk coffee or drunk Coca-Cola. I'm not even into caffeine. Somehow my brother got into drugs, hard drugs. It sucks. It's a bummer. I mean, it's not somehow. I know how it happened, but I'm super sad about it. You know, he passed away tragically in 2015 on September 8th. So whatever that is, 7 years ago. A little over 7 years ago. And I've got some regrets around my little brother passing away. He wanted to be mentored by me. And I had understood he was sober, but he wanted to me to get engaged in like a mentoring relationship with him. He wanted to live with me and be mentored by me. And it was a busy time in my life. I was going through a big festival. And so I said, yeah, we'll do it like next week. We'll start next week. And then he passed away in the week it took. So I put it off. I didn't want to get into it right away because I was in the middle of a busy weekend. It was John Mostomy. It was our biggest festival of the year. And so I had some stuff going on. So I said, yeah, next week after the John Mostomy Festival's over, then I'll we can start to do this. But it didn't happen. He passed away before it could happen. So I've got like a huge regret there that I didn't jump at the opportunity to help him out. Maybe if I helped him out, who knows? People have tried to cure me of this, but why? I made a mistake. There was a minute there where I could have helped him out. It wasn't like I didn't help him at all. We spent the day together. Just 3-4 days before he died, we spent the day together. He came to the temple. We spent the whole day together. He did a bunch of service at the temple. We fed him, which we'd fed him thousands of times. And we spent a ton of time together. My whole family, all my children and him spent time together. And he hugged each one of them individually. And we hung out together and we did service together and he did kirtan with us. It was like probably like the best day of his life, like 12, 15 straight hours of temple life. And then, a few days later he died, tragically. And I've got regrets. I told you my primary one. And they're legitimate regrets. I made a mistake. I zigged when I should have zagged. I didn't realize what we were dealing with. And so I didn't jump. And I've got many experiences like this. In many ways, my life is filled with experiences where I miscalculated and made a mistake. And then all I'm left with is the regret of the mistake I made and the lesson I learned from it. We're not in Shangri-La. It's not all rainbows and unicorns. The material world is a charnel house. It's a slaughterhouse. Everything gets crushed. The best you can hope for is that you get crushed in the normal order of things. And so, I've got this great regret, but I've also got this great happiness that my little brother came here to the temple just a few days before he passed away and had the loveliest of days and really got some benefit. Really went to a deep place with all of us. It wasn't enough, but it was. I find some solace in that. So my friend Chris passed away tragically a week ago. Of course, I don't have any right to feel too sad about it compared to his family because your suffering is billions of times more than mine, and maybe that's even an understatement or offensive to compare my suffering to yours. But I feel happy that Chris came here just a few days before he passed away. And we reconnected. I felt like there was some divine intervention there. Something special happened. He hadn't been in a long time, then he showed up. That's special. That means something. There's some value in that. And, this is the last point I'm going to make. So we had this verse that we're looking at, a beautiful verse. Kim pramatasya bahubi parokshai hayanai iha. What is the value of a long life where the truth is just always beyond your sight? Better just a short life. Better even an hour of understanding, because that's going to start you on the path of searching after the ultimate good, which can last beyond one lifetime. That's a valuable life. We shouldn't just look in terms of quantity of life, we should look in terms of quality of life. What did that person do in the time they were here? Better a short life with value. And that value is Shreyas. And Shreyas is contrasted to Preyas. It's ultimate good versus pleasure. And the world has both things. Etat asau, Shreyas cha Preyas cha manusham. Both Shreyas and Preyas come to you in the course of your life. Pleasure and meaning come to you in your life. And the wise person, samparitya, he looks carefully, and she extracts the value. When you look back at your life, you're going to see that there's tragedy and mistakes, and there's pleasure and pain and everything in between. If you're wise, you learn the art of extracting the essence and extracting the value and finding the good in circumstances and finding the meaning. And along with therapeutic regret and along with appropriate sadness, which shows that you actually care, there's a place for all of that. There's a place for grief. We need to figure out that lost art and science of extracting the value. Seeing the value in things. Because the world actually has both. And so I gave the example of my brother. This is the tragedy of his death, but there's also this beautiful thing that happened. And if I look carefully, I can see that. And there's something that matters. I can legitimately anchor myself to that and stay the course and make it and weather the storm and find value and find real joy, real happiness, profoundness. Even this otherwise crazy world. That's what makes the world not crazy. Without that, God would have to be distheistic. He'd have to be evil. If we live in this world with all of its temporariness and all of its suffering innately, and there was no value to be had, there was no depth to be found, there was no truth to be discovered, then the purpose of life is nothing. But in fact, those things are there. You can search after those things, and even to search after those things for a moment, even to search after those at all, even to see that truth at all, puts your head and shoulders above everybody else. It makes even a short life worth living, and gives solace, and gives anchor, and gives depth, and gives purpose, and gives meaning to what would otherwise just be an impossibility. All right, let's do a little kirtan. Thank you so much.